We're getting closer and closer to the main event on Saturday. We are up to the Old Forester Turf Classic, and this is a very important race because this is race number 11 on the Saturday Kentucky Derby card at Churchill Downs, May the 4th. And this is the race that is in all your pick fours, pick threes, double, a lot of those multiple race exotics. So you have to be right about this one leading into the Derby if you want to get alive and have an opportunity for a big score. One gentleman who knows quite a bit about big scores is going to join us in just a second. I want to make sure to remind all of you while you're handicapping the races, or if you're getting ready to start handicapping the races, head over to drf.com. Take a look at the Kentucky Derby past performances and the different packages they have available for you. Timeform US tools. They have betting strategies from David Aragona and Marcus Hirsch, different packages with clocker reports, whatever you need personally, they'll take care of you there, and they'll have something that fits your needs. Joining me now, someone who has a couple podcasts that I've listened to through the years and is a fantastic handicapper, a very sharp contest player, someone that I really enjoy talking racing with. And we'll talk about some of those podcasts and where you can hear more from him. Joining me now, Chris Larmey. Chris, how you doing, buddy?
Great. Great to be back on your show talking Derby and Derby, Derby card races.
Really strong fields this year and deep fields. What we like as gamblers, not a lot of short fields. So for guys like us and gals like us who want to be playing big prices and taking swings, you're going to have a lot of chances to do that on Friday and Saturday this week.
Yeah, especially this year they have 14 horse fields on the turf races, in the main body of the race. So, that's a whole different ball game when it comes to betting the exotics and things. You get some really crazy prices in both the verticals and horizontals. So cross our fingers that the turf course holds up and the weather holds up, but it could be a really fun day.
So Chris and me are going to go through the Grade 1 Turf Classic, which is race number 11, and then we'll get some thoughts from Chris on the Kentucky Oaks and the Kentucky Derby. Remember, for those of you who are listening on the podcast or watching on the video, we are recording on Tuesday night, so we're still a few days out. That's why we're kind of projecting with weather, and things have already changed where it was not supposed to be any rain, and then it was, and now it's kind of come back a little bit. So things definitely change as the days get closer and closer. But this is a fun field to dive into, Chris, because we have a Grade 1 field. We have no short prices on the morning line. I do think there are a couple that'll take some money because they've got some recent big figures and they're in really good shape. So just from a talking point, how did we want to set this race up? I think from the very outside, anytime Appleby shows up with horses now in the U.S. or anywhere in North America, we're going to take notice. And he has been sending some horses here and keeping them here versus having to go back and forth a lot of times with different horses. Naval Power came over here, raced on April the 12th in the Grade 1 Makers Mark and finished second behind another Appleby and Master of the Seas. So I think at least just from the connections, from the big speed figure, he's certainly a horse, Chris, that's going to take a lot of money in here.
Yeah, I mean, I don't blame Appleby, and I think it'll be a trend that will increase. I mean, they're throwing so much money at these races now. All these six-figure purses. Of course, the Euros who have the better turf horses, they're going to come over and poach those purses on a regular basis. And Charlie Appleby, has been the king of that. And like you said, I think he's actually just going to keep a string of horses in the U.S. to try to grab them all.
Why not? Right? Yeah. Even some of the Grade 2s, Grade 3s, you can get him at all levels. And he's just got a real great sense for which of his horses are going to come over here and perform well. I mean, they're generally facing better horses, but I think sometimes maybe the type of horse they are would matter. Maybe horses that are a little quicker or a little more versatile, a little more adaptable. Whatever it is, he's got a great sense for which of his horses are going to come over here and be able to perform right off the plane too, because a lot of times that's not an easy thing. And now he's going to have horses stabled here, so I think he'll probably be able to do even better if that's possible than what he's been doing. But the two to just kind of start with, Chris, I thought were him, and then I'm Very Busy's last couple races have been really impressive. He'd always shown some ability, but those last few, just from a speed figure standpoint, were a real big step forward from 3 to 4, in particular in the Muniz last time at Fairgrounds, where he earned a 103 buyer, and he was out in post 13 that day.
Yeah, the fun thing about this race is, I thought last year and I think we might have even talked about it in your pod, but I mean, the 3-year-old turf horses, last year's crop was about as strong as I have seen in a long time.
Mm-hmm.
And what's nice about that is the turf horses don't all, the best ones don't all get shipped off to the breeding shed right at the end of the 3-year-old year. Once they win a grade 1, they're gone.
Yep.
They stick around because they're not as valuable as stallions. So you get to see them at 4 and sometimes 5 or 6. And this race really shows that. I mean, integration, far bridge, program trading. I'm very busy. Web slinger. All these horses were mixing it up last year. They've already got a history against each other, and they kind of sorted themselves out as 3-year-olds. But it was still pretty close at the top, and now we're going to see who makes the move forward at 4, and are they good enough as a 4-year-old, as fully mature horses? Can they take on the likes of the Euros, from Charlie Appleby? And this will be a good first read on that, I think. And I'm very busy. It's kind of interesting because of all those 3-year-olds I mentioned last year, he was probably the least heralded.
Yeah.
But he all of a sudden just exploded. As a 4-year-old, he took a big leap forward. And like you said, his last 2 races, even the losing effort in the Pegasus was very good.
With trouble too, yeah.
Yeah, and so he has that recency in those recent races. But I just look back at 3-year-old and watch those races and look at the numbers, and horses like Integration, Program Trading, Web Slinger, and they were better horses.
Yeah.
And the Integration, Program Trading were much better. So, I'm not convinced that those 2 horses might not be capable of winning in here. They're not a lot bigger price, but I think you nailed it that the 11 Naval Power and the 6 I'm Very Busy will probably take more money than the others.
Mm-hmm.
And, one of those 2, probably either Integration or Program Trading, I'm not sure which, could float up. And that's kind of where I'm leaning initially. We can talk some more about each of those horses and why, but I think there's other good quality even farther down the field, maybe a little bit below those top 4. But that's normally what you see in these turf routes. It's usually the trip that determines the winner. It's not so much one horse is that much better than the others, and I think we'll see that again in this race.
What is always the talking point in these distance turf races, especially the last couple years in North America, is you got to start with the pace and where it's coming from, because so often, even in races where it looks like there's a decent amount of pace, a few of the horses take back, and we're kind of all scratching our heads going, why did that happen? Or why did some of these horses who actually look like their best chances to win were on the lead or close up, why are they taking back? This is a race where there's not all that much speed on paper when you kind of start to go through it. And one horse that I will throw into some of my pick 4s and 5s and late exotics, Chris, is definitely just going to be the 8, Never Surprise, because I don't know if he's as good as the best with it, but he does have a ceiling that we've seen from him a couple years back when he finished second in the Pegasus behind Colonel Liam, who was really good that time. He earned a very nice buyer speed figure would be very competitive with what the best have been running lately, those horses that we were just talking about. And if you look at his form, he had time off. He raced on March the 5th of 2022, and he was in the Canadian turf, and he was favored that day after his really good effort in the Pegasus. And something went wrong. He finished 5th. He was well beaten, and he was off for 9 months, shows back up, runs one time, and then he's off for 15 months, 16 months. And when he came back, you could just tell he needed some races to shake some of the rust off, to build that stamina back up. So on March the 2nd, he's beaten just a nose. He runs really well that day. Comes back on March the 30th. He's sitting off the pace. At the top of the lane, he looked like he was done and he was going to back up. And he really kept fighting, even though he was never going to win that race. He wasn't beaten all that much either. If he's been building up that stamina through those 2 races, can take one more step forward here, I just want him to be loose. I don't want him trying to sit like he did in his last few races. They went a little quick early, much quicker than they'll be going here early. So he wasn't right on the lead. But in this spot, going a mile and an eighth, he could be clear. I think they put Giroux aboard because that's got to be the game plan for him. Hey, get him out front. He's a speed rider. That's something that you think about with him. Obviously, he's had some physical issues that have kept him off the track for a while. But when he's good, he's been very good. And can he take one more step forward and get back to closer where he was at the top, right in that 98 to 100-ish Beyer speed figure range. At the very least, he'll give me a decent run for my money. And he's a horse that I like to have, at 10, 12 to 1 in a pick 4, pick 5. If turning for home, he has a length or two on the field.
Yeah, you just never know what the riders are going to do in these races. So he could. I do think he does seem to be a horse that will go forward and probably be on the lead. We haven't talked much about the Churchill turf course, but that's a big question mark going into this weekend. I mean, it's been so unreliable and so quirky, and some horses
hard
love
to
it.
Judge form off of, right? Exactly.
Yeah,
like where you were going. We can't get a real feel for what style. It just seems like certain horses like it and didn't, and it wasn't safe. It was all over the place. And so that's absolutely a factor. And if that's the case, sometimes it's sure not bad to have the horses who will be out front.
Right. It might be. I mean, and supposedly the course has matured, and it's a whole different course. It's just there's a lot of unknowns, but there probably is some weather this week, and so it's just really hard to predict what the course is going to play like, and how it's going to favor speed and stuff. Never surprised. I'd never talk you off a long shot, but it's always seemed to be like a notch below the best, and a mile and an eighth is probably really stretching its distance limitations because at a grade 1 level, you have grade 1 finishers, right? And it's really hard to hold those horses off unless you're just
at a mile and an eighth, especially too.
I mean, if you're at a mile and an eighth, that's just a tough distance to hold off grade 1 horses.
So in that situation, you always want to make sure you're rewarded for the price.
Right.
With those types of horses that are less likely winners, really did need everything to go their own way. For some of these horses to, you can't project things like that, but for you to get lucky sometimes like this, one of those two horses gets in some traffic, right? Things like that happen. And that does happen with horses that have the running style that come from behind. So you need a little luck. You definitely need the right price, but I'll be throwing this one in a few spots just because I think we'll definitely get a good run for our money. And I'm looking for maybe another one or two that I think can maybe even sit close and outrun their odds. I thought the 3 was a little bit interesting and not a horse that I think a lot of people will gravitate towards just for that same reason. I don't know if he is good enough to win. He can really hit the board and at least make an exacta try horse because I think he could fall into a nice spot here if there isn't that much early speed. And he's been in decent form as of late. He's definitely not the caliber of grade 1. He's more of a trip horse. Can he just fall into it and be under? But this is a quality race, Chris. Let's talk about some others that are on your radar. And you mentioned Integration. Sky's the limit for a horse like this. He's probably been a little disappointing in his last 2 going into the Pegasus where he was favored that day.
Yeah, on the Pegasus, if you watch that race, he had a good trip until he didn't. And it just completely kind of fell apart mid-stretch, and he really had no chance. So I would forgive that. I think it was better than it looks. I think, I don't know if he would have beat I'm Very Busy, but I think if you switch trip, even though I'm Very Busy didn't have a very good trip, he had a better one than in the stretch.
He at least had a shot, right?
Yeah.
It's like Integration didn't even really have a chance. There's kind of different bad trips,
So if they bet those two, such that I'm Very Busy gets bet down and Integration floats up, I would be very interested in Integration. Plus, his last race, he lost to Naval Power, but again, Naval Power kind of tripped out on the rail behind his stablemate, and Integration was on an outside post, and he's kind of outside the whole way, and he just didn't quite finish the race off. I don't think he really liked the yielding course either.
Nope. You're
Now
right.
he could.
And he kind of loomed up, Chris. Like the running line's a little deceiving too, because at the top of the lane in like early stretch, they were all in contention. There wasn't that much separation yet. And then we started to see Master of the Seas and Naval Power kind of separate, but he was in the mix. And I agree with you. I just don't think when the real running started, he was getting over the footing all that well, and a little bit of a wide trip. He finally is able to put a couple races together, kind of string them together, and maybe he can have a little more fitness out of that. And as you were pointing out, the posts and the trips could be completely flipped between him and Naval Power, or Integration could save all the ground on the inside, and Naval Power might have to be a little bit wide.
Yeah, I mean, Integration gets the one hole, and Naval Power gets the outside post. Now, Naval Power broke slow and probably will break slow in here, so I'm not sure the post matters much.
Yeah.
But Integration could get a really nice trip. You could skim the rail all the way around, and if Tyler can find a seam, not have not what he doesn't want to have happen what happened to Pegasus, where he got shut off completely. So Tyler's got to do a little bit better decision making than he did in that race. I'm not blaming him necessarily. A lot of times there's a lot of luck involved, but he needs to get a little better trip, and if he does, there's no reason why he couldn't win, because he has the talent. And, he has the ability to lay within striking range. He doesn't drop way back, but he can still finish off the races. He's definitely a player. It's all about price there. And I really think this morning line's kind of strange. Like you're never surprised is going to be much higher than 10 to 1.
I agree. He's going to be 15, I think.
Probably 20 to 1, I think.
Maybe,
yeah. And Naval Power, they're not all going to be 7 to 2 above.
No, those two that we mentioned, I think, like Naval Power to me felt like 5 to 2, 2 to 1. Even I'm Very Busy, shorter. And I do think a lot of these other horses we're talking about, if Integration is double the price of Naval Power, that's definitely value. That represents value to me, with some of the excuses and the possibility of a much better trip. Not even that Naval Power will get a bad trip, but as you pointed out, Integration could just get a much better trip, saving ground here, putting two starts together. And if, he's 6 to 1 and the other horse is 5 to 2, 2 to 1, the one is the one that really offers the value there.
Yeah. Same with I'm Very Busy, who's probably going to vie for favoritism with Naval Power. Integration has been beaten by both of those. But if you look, Integration was the favorite over both of those in their races, and he probably had the worst of the trips in both of those. So in turf racing, you're kind of looking for these horses who are as talented and have the ability, but and just didn't get the trip, and now they get the rail, right? Maybe this time they get firmer ground from the rail, and they get the trip, and that's, the time to have them.
The horse I wanted to mention a little bit was the 7, Web Slinger, who you pointed out earlier. This guy's one that I think you and I have talked about a couple different times through the years, because he's a super talented horse, but do you know what he is? He's just a deep closer, and he's at the mercy of racing luck, and he's gotten himself in some traffic trouble, and he's had some trips here. You feel like one of these days there's going to be one of these big races with his name on it. In fact, last year, he won the American Turf on this day, and it was, we as gamblers always remember. I definitely remember, because I needed Far Bridge quite a bit that day, and Web Slinger got me, and I looked all the way around like Far Bridge was going to win, and Web Slinger came and nailed him. He's super talented. I just don't know if he's going to get that type of pace he wants in this race.
Yeah, he's kind of a horse that almost has to get out in the clear, and that's the way Javier used to ride him, and he would always have these wide trips, and he'd run really well. And then, last few rides had some different riders have tried some different tactics, but he's going to have to probably come around everybody, and that's just a hard way to win if you're trying to beat good horses that are saving ground and get a trip. That's just a tough way to win.
Yep,
and he doesn't seem nimble enough to take the ground saving route.
And
He's
maneuver,
one of these ones, yeah.
Right? I think your analysis was spot on. He seems just like one of those horses that you really got to kind of wind up and push the button and then let him go and kind of get out of his way. And that's so difficult in turf racing like this, when the best horses are ones that the horses that will win more often are the ones that are going to be a little bit more adaptable, a little bit more tactical. And unfortunately, he can have the wicked late kick that he does. It's just, he leaves himself with so much to do more often than not. Others in the field that you want to mention, or others that are interesting to you?
Well, definitely program trading, because
Yeah. Yep.
other than a time when he got outrun by integration, but that was a day where integration got the better trip. So I'm not convinced there's much separating those two. And he's one that likes to be forwardly placed in a race where he could fall into a really good trip. Sitting second or third, and I don't think they'll have trouble reeling in Never Explain.
And versus talking about pace, right? Where I'm throwing out a crazy long shot horse that's going to be on the lead. He's a much more likely winner of taking advantage of a slow pace if he's able to sit second or third, right? Because he's just classy enough to probably be able to hold on, seal the deal, and get the jump on maybe these horses that we're talking about, like I'm Very Busy and Naval Power, Web Slinger, these horses who are going to be launching way out of it. Never Surprised will need things to go perfectly for him. A horse like Program Trading could sit behind that horse and get a really nice trip.
Yeah, and he's a really nice horse. He's what, 4 for 5. And the thing about him though is he is coming in off the layoff. It's Chad Brown, so you figure he could have him ready. His numbers aren't bad, but coming in on a graded stakes off a layoff like that,
first time older, yeah,
but he's certainly a horse that's going to make some noise this year. I just don't know if he'll do it in this race, but he could get the trip. The other thing about Chad Brown is when he has multiple horses in the race, especially when one of them already has a grade 1 win and the other doesn't, he's not above doing a little bit of team tactics kind of thing. So I wouldn't be shocked even if they put Program Trading on the lead in here. And if he goes wire to wire, great, because sometimes they do. But if not, it'll help make sure that there's an honest pace up front for his stablemate, I'm Very Busy, who's also very talented and is, on the top of his game right now and hasn't had a grade 1 win. He ran second in the Pegasus, but he still hasn't got that grade 1 win. And they really like those in the Chad Brown barn. So, I expect for Program Trading to be forwardly placed, and if not on the lead, he's going to take over. He'll be on the lead at some point in the race. If not at the start, when they turn for home anyway, he'll probably be on the lead.
And I'd be surprised if the morning line, like we were saying, is as close as it is if the off odds are as close as this morning line. I just feel like he's going to float up in comparison to I'm Very Busy, even for those connections, or at the very least, there's going to be a sizable margin between those two. I think at the very least, he's third choice at this, and a definitive third choice behind the top two. So if you're playing this horse in multis, he could play nicely if you're getting around I'm Very Busy and Naval Power.
Yeah, I mean, in the multis, no one's going to be singling Program Trading. If they're putting him in, they're probably playing 3 or 4 horses in the race. So you're getting some value if either he or integration were to win, because I do think, everyone will use Appleby. Everyone will probably use the other Chad, and then it'll just depend on, what they think of the other races and how big a ticket they're playing, how many other horses they include.
Yep. Some really good 4-year-olds, as you were pointing out, and we went through this field. Far Bridge is one that just gone figures hasn't quite taken the step forward. He would need to improve a little bit. He's second time in the Clement barn. He was the horse who got beat by Web Slinger on this day on American turf in 2023. Anyone else in here, Chris? We've gone through a lot of the field. We've talked about many of these. In what we like as bettors are races where it's a big field and we have a couple favorites or a couple horses that we think will take money that are a little bit vulnerable, and then a few others that we like at their possible price. And that's what this race gives us. An intriguing pace scenario where we may be able to capitalize on that and get some pace, and a couple of horses who will probably be a little bit overbet because of their recent figures, but their running style in a big field like this and some reason to upgrade some of their recent opponents, like integration, that's the type of race I like to attack.
Yeah, and it's a deep race. Even the second tier horses are pretty good. They're probably a cut below these, but and you did mention Farbridge. He doesn't have a license to improve second start as a 4-year-old, and he wasn't that far behind the best 3-year-olds last year, like Program Trading and
he was
Webslinger.
favored in the Saratoga Derby over both
Yeah.
of them, in August. And then, right after that, he goes to Kentucky. We can always excuse the Kentucky race, but he didn't even run poorly that day. He finished second. It was just at the end of his year, and probably something went a little bit awry, and he's off for, from September to March, shows back up at the very end of March. And you're right. You can't really knock him. He's never been beaten more than a length and a half in all of his starts. He just doesn't have some of the really strong recent form and, really big figures that some of the others do. But those are the horses you want to bet if they're talented enough to compete. And, he hasn't been beaten very far by Program Trading. So he could be one of those horses that floats way up.
Right. And Program Trading's hasn't raced yet this year. He's got that race under his belt. And if you compare he was much better at 3 than I'm Very Busy, who's going to be a much shorter price. So, I'm Very Busy improved quite a bit, but there's no reason why Farbridge might not do the same. And if he improves quite a bit off his 3-year-old form, there's no reason why he couldn't beat a horse like I'm Very Busy. So, you can make a case for him as well. I'm not quite as sold on him, but if he were to float up into double digits, I'd get real interested. Yeah,
absolutely agree. And I think he will. In just the way that we were talking about this race, I feel like a lot of people will probably gravitate towards 4, 5, 6 other horses in here first when you're talking about them. And then you look over at him and kind of do what we did and go, you know what? He doesn't have a whole lot wrong. He hasn't done much wrong. There's not really a whole lot of knocks. He's going to need to improve. Why can't he second start as a 4-year-old after a really long layoff where he didn't run a monster speed figure, but he still won the race? And he was going to win that race, and it was a softer group, but he's been really competitive with some of the others in here that'll take some money.
And that was just a prep. I mean, that was an allowance race to get him ready for this grade 1. I mean, he's a grade 1 horse. He has a grade 1 win already. So, that was a prep, and it's exactly what you want. You're not looking for a big number.
No.
You just want to make sure he's come back. He gets a tightener. And, the only thing I would say about him, and this is probably why I would put him a notch below, is that I think he's more of a marathon type than a 1 1/8 horse. This is kind of an in-between distance. And, he seemed to be better at a 1 1/4 type races. And this year, probably at the 1 1/4 to 1 1/2. So, it'll be interesting. This may be a little bit too sharp for him. That doesn't mean he couldn't win.
No.
But I think his best races will come at longer distances.
And it's like a double. It's a double positive because you throw him in here, he could get the setup, or he is still talented enough if things were to go that way. And if not, you build him up one more race and then stretch him back out off of his long layoff, get a little more stamina in him even more before you get him longer. Because I agree with you. I think, and sometimes you face just a little lesser of a horse when you're going longer like that. Horses that don't have as strong of this closing kick. And I think he'll be suited better to that. But as you pointed out, doesn't mean he can't win this race.
Yeah, and he's bred, by English Channel out of a Kitten's Joy mare. He's bred to go 1.5 miles on the turf and bred to get better with age. So I do expect to see him move forward. This may just not be the ideal circumstance, but it makes sense. It's a good stepping stone for the rest of the year, and who knows, he might get the right trip, and he might just, be ready to pop a big race even at the 1 1/8 distance.
A very, very intriguing renewal of the Grade 1 Turf Classic. Is there anything else in this race, Chris, you want to mention?
Well, I mean, we could go on, but I think we've hit the main contenders. There are a few other fringe players, but I think it's a good race. This is a very high quality, genuine Group 1 race, and we don't get too many, or Grade 1, a race, and we just don't get too many of these anymore where you get this kind of depth. So it's nice to see this where, these are really grade one horses.
They are.
There's 5 or 6 of them that legitimately belong in this race.
Well, there are a couple other big races on the weekend. Let's go back in time from Saturday. We're talking about Saturday's 11th race, and let's talk a little bit about what's happening on Friday with the Kentucky Oaks. I can pull up the Kentucky Oaks field as we discuss it, and this one was probably one of the more difficult races to make a morning line for. I think we can find a few horses that'll probably take some money off of it, but real quality in here, Chris, depth. And from a betting standpoint, there will be a lot of horses that'll represent value in this race.
Yeah, it's really kind of hard to tell how they're going to bet this race. But again, it's kind of a conservative. That's kind of the trend throughout this morning lines on the weekend is John Battaglia, who does the morning line, he made a lot of the long shots too short and a lot of the favorites too high, I think. He's got, he's afraid to make any kind of a move on these. So he just put them all, at
Safe.
7-2 to 5-1. There's like 4 or 5 horses. And I think they're going to get separated. I think Torpedo Anna has got a lot of buzz and is going to take money. That's who I think is probably the most likely winner, but I don't think the value is going to be there. I don't think you'll get 5-1. And, I think just FYI is, as the 2-year-old champ that had a little bit of trouble in last race is going to get bet down. So I'm guessing those are going to be favored. And that's the way I'm looking at it.
Nobody that I'm talking to really, and I would completely agree because no one I'm talking to is talking a lot about Tarifa. She could float up. Like I wouldn't be surprised if she's 6-1 or so.
But she is Brad Cox. She is Brad Cox.
Yeah. And so that
Pratt. But I mean, off the form, and I just think she'll be the third choice. She probably won't be super high, but I don't think she's going to be the favorite.
No.
I think the favorite will probably just FYI or Torpedo Anna because of the post draw. Really help Torpedo Anna. I think she's going to end up being favored because all the other favorites end up drawing way outside. So
the one of those that I do think will take money will be Ways and Means off of the really obvious trouble trips and then the monster workout in the morning the other day, which it could be a negative thing for her. I'm not even talking about necessarily her chances of winning the race, but I think she's kind of one of those real buzzy horses that she'll probably have an incredible grade when the workout reports come out. And a lot of people will look at her and think, oh, wow, I'm going to get, 5-1 on her. I don't know if you will either. And so if those 3 horses take a little money, there's going to be 2 or 3 others that float up.
Yeah, those probably are the 3 best horses. But I don't think you'll get a great price on any of those. So and to me, those probably are the most likely winners. But we can talk about some of the others. I think they're maybe a little less likely, but probably be better prices. So I don't know where you want to start.
Sure. One horse that there are 2 I think that are double digits that are very interesting. In the 3, Where's My Ring, and the 12, Power Squeeze. And in talking to people repeatedly, those are some of the longer prices I think that people would be interested in because they're improving from starting with Where's My Ring, Chris. On speed figures, she's right in the mix with a lot of the best fillies in this race. Like she's not overmatched by any means. She'd been a maiden for a while and she just put it all together. I like the fact that she's earned nice speed figures on different tracks. It wasn't just something she did at Santa Anita. She went over to Aqueduct and ran well there also. Didn't beat a very good group, but she did exactly what she was supposed to do that day and finally showed that she can win. We see it happen with horses all the time with that light bulb angle when they win and they come right back. So I wouldn't be shocked to see her run well. And even Power Squeeze was the other who she's one of those horses that finds a way to win. She's pretty versatile. I don't know how many of these fillies want to come from 5 or 6 lengths out of it. She's done that before. And so if that was the case and she had to do it, at least she's shown us that she's done that. Those are 2 that I think are kind of fun horses if you're playing multi-exotics to have maybe one or the both of them on some tickets because I don't know if the difference between them and the top of the division is all that much and the price might reflect differently. So those are at least a couple prices that were on my radar. You can respond to those or throw any others out there that you want.
Well, I think those are probably the two ones that are the of the next tier below the favorites. I think are the ones that have a chance. I mean, you talked about Where's My Ring. I mean, she was a maiden for a long time, but I mean, she ran the Breeders' Cup Juvenile, so it's not like she hadn't been facing good horses. It's kind of weird how she just couldn't break her maiden, but she seemed to run better. She just seems to run better when against good competition.
She
And
does.
that second to Kenza, who's really nice, horse that I think that was the Baffert horse that
Yep.
can't run it in
Yep.
Kentucky. So there's no reason why she couldn't win, and she did. She has shown that she has can get position and at the same time hang on the rail and finish off her races. And given that she drew an inside post and there's a lot of speed in the race, that's the trip she's going to get in here. So if she can, take a little kickback and settle in the pocket or just off the lead and save ground and finish the race, there's no reason why she couldn't win. And it would seem like she's got to be a price in here, right?
Yeah. I think that,
So
yeah, I can't imagine those horses getting bet more than where they are. I think the odds for them are pretty close, and they're fair. Any horses that you're against in here?
um it's Tarifa. If she really was the favorite, I probably would fade her, but I'm not convinced she is. So I'm kind of ambivalent. I think she could win. But I don't think she's any more likely to win than Where's My Ring, who's going to be 2 or 3 times the price. So I guess I am fading her. And Leslie's Rose will take money, and that horse I think could have a problem winning from that post when
Yep.
she was the one who her last race was a bit dressed up. It looks very impressive. It earned a good number, but
Perfect
she,
trip, right?
she got a perfect trip and on a track that was probably biased towards the rail. Whereas just FYI was coming off the layoff and had the tougher trip and has been training lights out. So, between those two, I would go with just FYI, but I'm not convinced just FYI will be a higher price. But, I would say, I'd probably fade her because she'll
Me
be
too.
one of the favorites.
She's my fave, because I think her race at Gulfstream, she was a heavy favorite, and she was kind of disappointing that day. I mean, she was down on. She didn't get a fantastic trip, but it wasn't a bad trip. It wasn't like she had trouble. The horses who finished in front of her maybe got a slightly better trip, but then it just really felt like the Ashland was the perfect storm of events for her, because her price was great. She was forgotten about. She was and so when you're looking back at the race, it's like, wow, that was the day to bet her
Yeah.
at 9-1, kind of coming back off the disappointing effort at Gulfstream when she was a heavy favorite that day, and she ends up getting a perfect trip, and she rewards you then. And could she win this race? Absolutely. But she's going to have to do it, I think, in completely different ways than we've seen from her so far, where she's either won right on the lead or, as you pointed out, that perfect trip, saving ground on a rail that was a good rail, and then moving out. I just think in this race against other really nice horses, there's probably from Where's My Ring to, even Regulatory Risk to, the Torpedo Anna to Tarifa to the 11, the 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. Do they all want close to the same kind of trip in this race?
Well,
Like,
and plus Leslie Rose, from post 14, she's not going to get the perfect trip. She's going to be parked wide. They're not going to drop her back and over. And if they try to gun her out, that won't work. So she's going to be hung wide. And, her breeding and her running, I just think she's maybe challenged to go a mile and an eighth, especially with a wide trip. So, there is one horse I really like. It's just I'm afraid she's not going to get in the race. That's the one I would have played would have been the 16 horse Candide if she could somehow get in, because this is a horse I think that's had some really bad trips, including her. I thought she was probably best in the Breeders' Cup Juvenile. So,
the way
and
they do the
she's been
points with the
bet.
fillies too is a little bit odd. You feel like the two that are on the outside, they both. Our Pretty Woman, she doesn't do very much wrong, and she was second in one of the last prep races and didn't get a chance to get in. I guess it just shows you how good this group is this year, and that's a positive thing because, knock on wood, we haven't had a lot of the really talented horses get hurt or have defections, and they're all here and they're all showing up. But yeah, there are a couple horses on the outside that would be at least able to hit the board if they got in.
Yeah, and I like Candy drawn on the outside. Unlike Leslie's Rose, she has a habit of breaking poorly, and she drops back anyway. So rather than having her get shuffled back and banged around, I just as soon have her drop back and over. And, if the pace cooks up and she finally gets a trip, this is a pretty good horse. I mean, they bet her pretty heavy in her off the long layoff at Keeneland on a track that, had been kind of playing towards speed. I didn't quite understand that at all. That race was really bet weird. That horse Impel took a lot of money too. The odds board was really weird in that race. But, she's a very good horse, and she probably needed the race, and she didn't get a good trip, and there's a lot to like about that horse. So, I just hope I get a chance to play her down the road, because if she really goes off at like the 20-1 morning line whenever she runs again, I'll be all over that. And I'm kind of hoping she draws in because I don't really mind her on the outside post, but the chances of, 2 scratches are probably pretty slim at this point. But, that's would get me excited. If she could get in the race, that's where I would go in here, as I would probably be keying her with a couple of the others, and, betting her to win at a big price because, I think, she was 5-2 in the Breeders' Cup Juvenile, right? She's a good horse.
She's got ability. She was a little unlucky getting back to the races. So I think she missed the opportunity at another prep. And so when that happens sometimes, and you're at the mercy of what happened to her, a less than perfect trip or a little bit of traffic or something in your one real shot, and then you can't get in. So whether or not she gets in here, we'll keep an eye on her for where she does show up. Because I agree with you. She has tons of talent. Main event on Saturday, Chris. It's the Derby. Those 2 horses that are probably going to take a lot of money that are installed as your top 2 choices. Opposite running styles. One inside, Sierra Leone, who's the deeper closer. Fierceness to the outside. Incredible speed figures when he's at his best, but doesn't really put 2 races together and could get a wide trip in here. Talk to us about how you see this race playing out and some of the horses that are on your radar.
Well, the 2 favorites, I don't like Sierra Leone. For a lot of reasons. I think that's by far the underlay in the race. And I do think that Fierceness is getting a bad rap, and he's much better, I think, than a lot of real sharp handicappers are giving. It's just interesting how these narratives get going in the Derby that aren't always spot on. I don't think he's going to get a wide trip. I don't think it's going to be a fast pace, and I don't think he's that unreliable. And he's certainly brilliantly fast. And if he runs his race, I think everyone agrees if he runs his race, everybody's running for second. The debate is on likelihood that he's going to run his race. But the argument I make is, let's say you think he's unreliable. Well, and I'm guessing you're in that camp. So how unreliable is he? Like, what's the chance that you think he'll run his race?
Yeah,
right?
Here it's funny because I was kind of talking about this, I think, with Ren Carruthers a little bit earlier today. And I think what we do, too, as gamblers is we really want to be hard on horses like this that don't win those races where they have a little bit of trouble. And that's just not what we do with other horses. I think it's just unfair. When Fierceness shows up after winning the Breeders' Cup Juvenile, you're just expecting him to win now wherever he shows back up. Even if he shows up in a race first start of the year, he definitely needs the race. He gets bumped at the start. Like, we don't want to give him legitimate excuses like we do for other horses. So I'm kind of in real mixed with him because I don't necessarily love his trip in this race because I do think they're going to go a little quicker. So I'm a tad bit concerned about that, but I'm not completely against him overall as a horse and think he can only win if he got the lead one way or he can't sit off a little bit. He's really nice. And I do think you're right in that people are now wanting to just not give him legitimate excuses for races that we should give him excuses for.
Yeah. So I'll just kind of ask you some questions just to kind of try to make my point. Because I think he's elite. I don't think he's not really good. I think he's elite. I mean, if you look at his numbers, as a 2-year-old, he ran faster than Pharaoh. As a 3-year-old, he ran faster than Justify going into the Derby. I mean, he's faster than just about any horse in the last 20 years coming into this race. So he's elite in terms of his best race. But let me just ask a question. Let's just say he is inconsistent. I'm not going to buy that, but what do you think the chances are that he'll run his race? Is it 1 in 100? Is it 1 in 10? Is it 1 in 5? Is it 1 in 2?
Yeah.
What are the chances you think?
1 in 3, right?
1 in 3. Okay, so 1 in 3 means you're making him 2 to 1, right?
Yeah.
So if he's probably going to go off at 5 to 2 or 3 to 1, he's value. As a favorite in the Derby, he's probably a value play, even if you think he's only going to run his race 1 out of 3 times. That's the way you have to think of it. He could run it. You could say he's going to run terrible 2 out of 3 times, but if he runs his race, that 1 out of 3, he's got the numbers that lay over the field. That's what people aren't factoring in. If he runs his race, he wins. It's not like if he runs his race, nobody's going to beat him.
They're not close.
And so, if you think, and I don't think most people think he's got more than a 50-50 or 2 out of 3 chance of running a bad race, and if that's what you believe, then you can't really fade him as a favorite because he's offering value, and especially in the Derby, if you can find the winner, and you're getting some value and he's the most likely winner, that's big because you can still get big payoffs in the exotics with, the favorite winning, especially when he's a favorite that actually you're getting a better price than you should. So to fade him, you have to think he's, 4 out of 5 times or more, he's likely to run a bad race. And I just don't know how you could make that argument. A horse that 3 of his 5 races have been absolutely brilliant,
Would probably win this.
Yeah. And look at it this way. I mean, just I don't usually wax eloquently about the favorite in the Derby. In fact, I'm trying to think of how many times I've done this.
Never.
Not many.
That's why the point stands a little bit, because you're not someone who would be doing this often.
Yeah, I'm not a chalk eater. Anybody that knows me will verify that.
Oh yeah.
But I mean, if you look at Fierceness in his first race, he ran a 95 Beyer. There's only a couple horses in this field that have ever run a 95 even in their last start before the Derby as a 3-year-old. And the horse that's supposed to be better than him in a lot of people's eyes, Sierra Leone, best race is a 98. That's 3 Beyer points better than he won on debut. That's a length. And then he ran 105 as a 2-year-old in the British Cup Juvenile. That's 3 lengths better than anything Sierra Leone's ever run. In his last race, Sierra Leone would have been 10 lengths behind. So it's he's that much better than everybody in the race because that's the second choice, at least of the U.S. horses. So he lays over this field if he runs his race. So I just don't and then I could I don't know how much time you want me to spend on Derby since this.
Yeah, go
because
ahead.
To me. He has to have everything his own way to win. First of all, when a horse is run 5 times, you can't make those kind of statements. It's just stupid because, you can say he has to have everything his own way to run his race. And if you look closer, you've already talked about the Holy Bowl, where I just think Pletcher was thinking of it as a prep. He thought there was nothing to beat, and the horse was really short. And he had some trouble, and he just came up short, and they weren't going to push too hard because it was just a prep. And I talk about this all the time on my pod. What you want in that first race off a layoff as a 3-year-old is just a race to tighten them up, because it's that next race where you're going to get that big improvement. That's where you want to see that breakthrough to a career best effort in their second start off the layoff. And that's exactly what he did in his second start, exactly what you expect. For most horses, you'd be all worried that, God, he ran so fast, he's going to regress off that. But for him, that was about exactly what you would hope he would run, because he ran 105 as a 2-year-old, a little bit of improvement. You're looking for like 5, 6, 7 points improvement on the Beyer scale, and that's exactly what you got. He improved 5 points. So he's maturing exactly like he'd want. He's coming into this race training lights out. And if you look at his other bad race that everyone talks about where, he got beat by 20 lengths in Champaign, and you actually go back and watch that race, you'll come back completely different idea about it. It's this horse chuck it in when everything don't go his way, because out of the gate he stumbles and then he gets completely pinballed. I mean, completely slammed multiple times, and he shuffled back to last. And if a horse was going to quit, that was a horse that was going to quit. But immediately he gathered himself up, he zips back up, and he's zooming right back into contention. And just really bad luck, he ends up getting banged just like the first time. 2 or 3 times he gets banged again, shuffled way back. And if he was a horse that was going to quit every time things didn't go his own way, that would have been it. But you know what? Irad steered him out in the clear, and he zips right up 3 wide to the leaders. And there was 2 good horses inside of him, Timberlake and General Partner, on a day where the rail was good. General Partner was on the lead on the rail. Timberlake was in the pocket. He zooms up for the 3rd time. He's had to accelerate in the race, gets up with the leaders, hangs with them on the turn, and then finally gets tired, understandably tired. In his 2nd lifetime start, first time routing, having to make 3 moves in 1 race. He got tired. Irad quit riding the last 1/8 of a mile, just flagged him with the whip. And that was that. And plus, it was a sealed, sloppy track. Now, how you can say that horse is a quitter or has to everything go his own way to run his race based on that effort, it's just lazy handicapping. You're not watching it. You're not watching objectively. So I don't think there's really any evidence that says he has to have a perfect trip. And his Breeders' Cup Juvenile was not a perfect trip.
Lead. I mean, he was sitting. He sat a little bit.
It was a solid pace. He pressed the pace, and then Muth, who's a good horse, came up on him, and he was between horses. He had a horse on the inside and the outside, turning for home. He was between horses in a battle. He kicked away and drew off. Now, that wasn't a perfect trip, but there's no way between horses, pressing a solid pace, having a good horse, trained by Bob Baffert on his home track, one of the favorites, breathing down your neck on the outside on the turn. That is not an easy trip. He was just the best horse, and then he kicked away and won. So again, that wasn't a perfect trip win. So I just don't get this narrative. I think it's completely wrong. I don't think he needs to have a perfect trip. And I think he's got, if you look at the Derby since they went to the point system, and this is where kind of recency bias really can help. The last 2 Derbies have kind of had pace meltdowns, right? They've had fast pace, 45 and 5th, 45 and 3/5. But in the 8 or 9 previous runnings up until the first point system race, every single race was won by the best speed horse. Every single one of them. And some of those paces were 45 and 3, 46, 46 and 1, 46 and 2. It wasn't like they were crawling on the front end. A couple of them were 47 and change. But, American Pharaoh, California Chrome, Justify, Always Dreaming. I mean, the list goes on. They're all the best of speed in that race. And Johnny V was riding a lot of those horses. And if you look at his last 3 or 4 rides in the Derby, they've been really good. Even his losing ride in Code of Honor was brilliant. You've got him on a horse that's going to be pressing probably Dornoch. He's not going to be that fast of a pace because, they've already said they're not going to send Track Phantom. They don't want to. They're going to try to get him to rate. The other speed horse, Just a Touch, he faded in the stretch after chasing a hot pace last time. Can't believe they're going to send him trying to go 1.25 miles the first time when it's only his 2nd time around, 2 turns. They're going to be, a little bit conservative with him. And that's the way they typically ride horses today anyway. So it's not going to be some crazy fast pace, and he's not going to be hung wide. Even if he breaks a step slow, like Authentic did when Johnny V rode him. That outside post gives you all kinds of options. You can break a step slow. This horse, once he gets in the clear, got a high cruising speed. Johnny V is going to let him roll up to, and if Dornoch gets shut off or something, he'll let him get the lead. Somebody like Dornoch wants to quarter horse for the lead, he'll just follow him around. And then if he's the best horse, which I think he is by far, they're going to have a hard time catching him. So, I think he's a standout, but he's actually not my pick to win. But of all the U.S. horses, I think he stands out. And most of my exotic tickets, he'll be on the top slot for it. But I do have I like another horse as a win bet. But I mean, I just think that and again, from very sharp handicappers, I think they're really, really missing the mark with this horse. And there's a good chance after the Derby, everyone's going to be scratching their head saying, wow, how do we let him go off at, just 5-2 or 3-1? He just won by 10 and he looked like he could have won by 20,
And that's the key, right? I'm curious because that is the overwhelming narrative, how much that will play into the odds board on a day like the Derby, where the odds boards are just so crazy to predict nowadays because there's so much of that random money and so many people that are playing names and different things here and there. But you're right. If there's a reason where, because so many of the serious bettors are not putting large amount of money on him and it gets spread out, we haven't seen real heavy favorites in the Derby all that much, and we haven't seen the real big long shots. And if that ends up being the case here, and the two horses that were installed at 5-2 and 3-1 for some reason float up, because that's a possibility, that is something that we could really be doing after scratching our heads. This is such a different animal with the way people bet this race.
Yeah, and plus it just seems like, and again, I think this is the recency bias, because the last two races, the horses kind of fell apart a little bit on the front end, although Two Fills was pretty close to pace. People seem to think that if it's a fast pace, you can't win near the lead. But like I said, if you go back just 3 years, you go back 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, every one of those were fast paces for the most part, and the horse near the front still won.
Sitting close or sitting a little wide,
and from an outside post, many of them from outside post. So to me, the only thing that would have got me a little concerned about Fierceness is because occasionally he has broken a step slow. He didn't in his last race, but that can hurt him. So if he had drawn inside, that might have been a bigger issue. But from the outside post, that's actually exactly where he wants to be, because now he can stalk, and get out in the clear, and just there's a whole more than a quarter of a mile to get over. And if you've got a horse with good speed, you're going to get a good position with a rider like that. You're going to get a good trip. He's going to get the Derby winning trip for 9 out of the last 11 years. He's going to get that. So he's the most likely one to get a good trip, most likely one to get the Derby winning trip, and he's by far the fastest horse in the race. How could he not be like a standout, in the, on the odds board? And he's not. And it's not just casual players, it's smart players that are saying he's not reliable. And to me, and to say like a horse like Sierra Leone, who draws an inside post coming from a mile back, where, the only time those kind of horses win are when race falls apart. And usually it's not the favorite closer that wins, it's some long shot that gets the better trip. I don't get that at all, how he could be vying for favoritism in this race.
It sounded like when you said he's the one of the American horses I like the most, that you were going in a different direction. And the one that I will gravitate up towards is the 11. I think that's where you're headed, Forever Young.
Yeah. I've been a Japanese fan. I picked Dermasoda Gake last year, kind of lost all chance at the start, but he proved he was a pretty good horse in the Breeders' Cup Classic, and I ended up making a lot of money betting him in the exacta in that race, so I got my money back. But I think this is a much better horse, and he's a much more versatile horse. And this, there's not really much to beat in here. I think to me, he's clearly better than any of the U.S. horses, but he's clearly a notch below Fierceness. Although he's the one horse that you just don't know how good he is. I think he still has upside, and he could still move forward. So he might be the one horse that could give Fierceness a run for his money.
If they all if they all showed up with their A game kind of a thing, right? Or anybody got ideal circumstances. Yeah, he's such an unknown too, Chris. And what I did like, just a small little thing in watching his last few races, because it's nice that he's got the foundation. He has a couple races at 1 mile and an eighth, and another one at 1 mile and 3/16, which is a positive. He's going to go third start of the year now, so he should be ready to maybe take a little step forward. in his last two, in particular in that Saudi Derby, he had the really wide trips that you might have to have in the Derby, where you're sitting 4 wide, kind of all the way around. He was wide again last time out. I think they've said he doesn't like kickback, which could be a thing. And I was actually talking with David Aragona about that because David made Forever Young his top selection. He was saying that he thought it was a little bit kind of over embellished, and it was something that may have happened one particular time when the horse got kickback, still won that day. So it wasn't as if, oh yeah, there was kickback and then this horse just was nowhere to be found. So he's such a wild card, so intriguing. I don't think I can have many tickets closing exotics that he wouldn't be on, just because I think, Chris, I at least feel like this is the best chance that they've ever had with the horse so far to win the Derby.
Yeah, I mean, the travel part is the biggest question, but this horse, he didn't travel as much as you think. They took him to Saudi, and then they went straight to Dubai, and then they went straight to the U.S. It's not like he's been going back and forth to Japan. And he has certainly been able to run at different tracks all over the place. So, he carries his track with him. The whole thing about kickbacks completely wrong. I won't go into a lot of detail, but the horse won 2 races taking all kinds of kickback in Japan. No horse likes kickback. They put this mask on his face just because they anticipate that he'll be getting it and it'll soften the kickback. And if you've ever watched races at Maidan where they put it on him, the kickback there can be the most brutal kickback in the world. I mean, some days at Maidan you can't win unless you're on the lead, kind of thing. And they've been training him behind a horse and putting this mask on, all because they think, he'll probably be taking kickback and they want to make it as easy as he can. They know he can run in it because he's run impressively with taking kickback for an entire race. So I wouldn't put any stock in that, and I wouldn't expect him to be 5 wide. I don't think that's the way they're going to ride him. I think that everything they've been doing is prepare him, to get, be able to not have to go 5 wide. It'd be great if he can run in the clear without going 5 wide, and he does have some tactical speed, but he definitely can finish his races off. And I just think he's more talented than the others, and he's not a stone cold closer. He can put himself, much closer than like the other closers that, like Sierra Leone or Catching Freedom or Honor Marie. So, to me, he's the horse that will get first run of the main contenders of the closing. The horses that are becoming stock or closers, and I think he's the best. And, I'm a little biased and because I have a future book play on him at a pretty good price, and I already bet some future book exactas with him. So that's always a little bit dangerous when you get to the race because your judgment gets clouded a bit.
You've had some good success there. I remember Medina Spirit was
that was the last one. Yeah, right? That I had.
Not bad, and that didn't sway you that day necessarily either. But yeah, he's so interesting to me too. He feels like this is the right group, a lot of it makes sense for as what you were pointing out. Like overall, I don't think this is a deep group. There's some nice horses in here, but there's not like a bunch that scare you, just even on speed figures. Right?
Yeah,
like,
and
this is the one, and that's and a bunch of other nice horses. And yeah, he's really like the more and more we get closer. And what I think I like about him most now, Chris, is like a month ago, I was a little worried that this horse was going to get bet. And I haven't been hearing nearly as much about him recently. Yeah, I've been hearing buzz about a bunch of other horses and just nothing negative about him, but not a whole lot of, oh yeah, he's the best out on the track in the mornings, or wow, he's looked like this, or there's just not as much conversation around him. I think he will be that price, right? Around 10-1, maybe even, a tad above. I don't think much above, but that feels like the range he's in. And I was worried at some points he might have been closer to 6 or 8 just a month ago, the way things were shaping up. So I like that he is seems like he's flying under the radar a bit.
Yeah, you never know they're going to bet the Derby. He does have a really good demeanor. He's very laid back, so I don't think he's going to get. And he's, been running on big days, the Saudi Derby, the UAE Derby, a big race in Japan. So he's been used to crowds. He's used to big fields. All that stuff shouldn't bother him. Part of the problem is the way they train these Japanese horses. They just don't work them fast. and they work them really slow, and they only let them run like the last eighth or quarter of a mile of their workouts. And that his latest workout was like that. I mean, he comes back with like a 102 workout, but he's kind of galloping the whole way, and he runs maybe 11.2 last eighth of a mile, but it just doesn't look very impressive. And it's not the way they train him in the U.S. So, that I think that's part of the reason why he's not getting a lot of buzz, which is fine with me.
Yeah.
But that's just the way they train them in Japan. They don't try to get fast workouts out of them. And this trainer has had success shipping to the U.S. He's had success shipping anywhere. He's done really well. And the Japanese horses are due, but they haven't done it yet. Although they really haven't. People, the UAE Derby thing. It's only been the last 5 or 6 years that the Japanese have started doing this, and they seem to be getting better horses here every year, and this is the best yet. So maybe this is the time. We'll see. But to me, I don't think there's a lot to beat. There's some other U.S. horses I'm kind of interested in more underneath, and I think it's really Fierceness' race to win or lose. Forever Young, the possible upsetter. And, those two, I think, are a notch above the others. After that, I think it's pretty wide open. Sierra Leone, yeah, he has a chance, and he probably could hit the board, but I don't think he's really any better than 3 or 4 others. Like, Just a Touch, I thought ran a better race in the Bluegrass than Sierra Leone. So, the Sierra Leone had a rabbit set up of suicidal pace, and he got a great trip and set up. And, yeah, he ran past Just a Touch, who was kind of cooked a little bit. That was his first time, ever going more than a mile.
He was close to that pace too.
He was very close. He's pressing it. And, I think he'll get a lot out of that race. And Sierra Leone didn't really finish that fast. It looked like he was, but he didn't come home that quickly. So you got a horse that's probably going to be dead last, especially drawing the inside post. He could get shuffled way back. Trying to come around all those horses, I just think he's really overrated, and he's to me just another Chapit Trice. I felt exactly the same way about that horse last year. And this horse looks so much like him. I think he's probably doing the same thing. He'll run 3rd or 4th or 5th, never really threatened, and he'll get way overbet.
Chris, some of my favorite listening each week is to the Sport of Kings podcast, where you and Scott and a guest will pick out one of the better sequences and whatever tracks having a big late pick 5 usually, because those are the low takeout wagers. They're more challenging, but they're fun sequences to discuss on shows, and they give you the opportunity to give big prices out. And it's a great show to throw on the night before you do your handicapping, or the morning when you're doing your handicapping and finalizing things, because you and Scott have what you do with your shows is what I like to do with mine. The way I think the mindset that you have, I'm not usually putting myself out an exact ticket, because things will change sometimes with a couple days out, but you can always hear the real key horses in each race. And the way you play, I only need 1 or 2 of those horses that I might not have had on my radar. And that's why I love listening to your show, because Scott might have a horse that wasn't, you may, or one of your guests might. And then all of a sudden, they're horses that throw one into your pick 4 or pick 5, because a lot of times they're, 10, 12, 15 to 1. Those are the horses I'm looking for from sharp people like you. So I appreciate the way you do it. And then your other podcast, kind of an opposite, where it's more about building good habits and listening to people who have won and had really great success, and what were the things that they did to get them those successes. And so they're different shows, because one of them is just, hey, this is going to help you with the sequence. The other is one that is really evergreen. You can go back and listen to it years after, because it's more about building good habits, and I think things that will help make you a better gambler overall.
Yeah, thank you. That's a great summary. I appreciate the kind words, and that you've listened to the podcast. That's exactly what I try to do for, the Sport of Kings. It's really trying to help you think a little bit differently about the races, and maybe not for that particular race, but we'll, share some sort of tidbit or angle that you can incorporate, not just in that race, but maybe in future races that you handicap. And then the bet with the best is really focused more on not really how to pick winners, but how you turn that into a good bet. and how you become a successful horse player. And it's a lot more than just picking winners. So we try to go beyond the picking winners piece and really, like you said, delve into how you, hearing it from people who've had long-term success, how they got there, what they learned. And, they're really good about sharing that information. We've got a smorgasbord this week because I have Mike Maloney, a pro player.
Nice.
We did a bet with the best podcast, not about this year's Derby and who's going to win, but about how to approach the Derby and from a handicapping and betting perspective, how it's so unique given it's a 20-horse field going 1.25 miles, and 3-year-olds and, what that means. And plus it's the, biggest race in the world, the race everyone wants to win. So how does that make it different than a normal race? We talked about things like, post positions and pace and how you bet a 20-horse field in exotics like a $1 superfecta, with that often pays $50,000 to $100,000. How can you make a playable size ticket that gives you a chance to hit that kind of stuff? And then we've already taped a Sport of Kings podcast going just over all the Derby horses.
Nice.
You kind of got my main opinions, but you can get Scott's. And our special guest there was Maury Wolf, who's just really sharp, long-time successful player. And then we've got Andy Beyer coming on Thursday. We're going to go over the late pick 5 that ends with the Derby.
Excellent.
Kind of our normal Sport of Kings podcast. So, a lot of content there. There's a lot of content out there, including great stuff that you have and others like David Aragon. And you mentioned David and Marcus are doing their betting. Those are two really sharp guys. So I'd highly recommend people take a look at that you mentioned, early on in the broadcast.
Yep. Part of that.
Lots of good content.
The Derby past performances package. David is so sharp with the morning lines, and those two just fantastic handicappers and really good racing minds. And that's what's fun is that, like you said, there's a lot of content out there, and sometimes it can feel like overload, but these are the weeks where we like in the times this and Breeders' Cup and heading into the Triple Crown races where it's fun when this happens for horse racing because it's not often. It's not always. It's like when you watch, the NFL and they're in the playoffs and everybody's got to take on a team, to start. And that's what's nice about right now is you'll hear a lot, but there's some really sharp people out there. And I think you can learn something from almost everyone that you're listening to, whether it be what to do or what not to do, or things that work or don't work for you. So yeah, I love these weeks, and it was nice. They actually got the races out I think a whole day and a half, 2 days earlier this week, year, where they normally were doing it on Monday instead. And I like the way they did it Saturday night. That made their card seem bigger. I'm sure they got a few more people playing the races and paying attention and showing up there. So yeah, we are early in the week, ready to rock and roll. Looking forward to listening to Andy Beyer go over the pick 5. Sport of Kings also has the Derby runners all taken care of for you, and then more of an approach podcast. So everything to help you out with your handicapping, with your gambling this week. Chris, I always look forward to these conversations. We go down some really fun rabbit holes with horses and some of the reasoning and trips that we like. And I always am led to a couple that weren't on my radar from you. And these are why we have these conversations. And I appreciate your time. And wanted to ask, are you playing any big contests coming up?
I think there's some contests over for the Derby, so I'll probably play in that. And if it, Fiercest and Forever Young hit the exact, maybe I win that.
Look towards the top. Look towards the top at the end. That might be...
That's right.
Chris, buddy, thank you so much. It's funny. It's been a while since the old Elite Racing Network. It was a short-lived network, but I got to meet some really sharp people and develop some good relationships. And you were one, and we've had a lot of conversations since then. So thank you always for your time, Chris, and I wish you the best of luck this week.
Thanks. Back at you. Good luck.
Thanks so much, everyone, for hanging out with us as we move from the Turf Classic to the main event. We'll go horse by horse and share some thoughts on the Kentucky Derby coming up next.